All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Ludwig Hiedler from Weingut Hiedler, situated in the north of Austria, northeast of Austria, in the Kamptal area. And I will tell you a little bit about the 2021 vintage harvest, which was definitely a very interesting one. And also a very beautiful one, like just judging from the grapes we harvested and the musts and the young wines that we have in the cellar already. So let's start with the vegetation period. Well, let's start with the winter. Before the vegetation, we had a relatively cold winter. In my memory, also a lot of snow, which was nice. So most of the time that I looked out of the window here of the office, could see everything white. And that means, I mean, it's usually a good sign. Yeah, that's what we like to see, because the snow in the end, once it melts, it will like go into the soil very slowly, and as long as there is a snow cover, you will also don't have any evaporation out of the soil, which was not a thing we were worried about anyways, because we definitely had good water reserves from 2020. If you can remember the vintage reports from 2020, was a very wet year. And so, yeah, that was another Corona spring, nice and calm. We could focus on our work, on pruning, getting the compost out, and the winter remained relatively, yeah, cold, average. With I think only in March where we had like a little peak up to 20 degrees, which was already people getting in alert mode. Hopefully we don't get an early bud break, like like early warm spring, which didn't happen at all. So after this, we went back to rather cold temperatures, which persisted well into May, which meant that that was actually a very late bud break this year, and or a rather late bud break this year, with a very late flowering. So flowering was happening in end of June, sometimes lasted into the first week of July. And I remember we had our first hail around that time. So we had a couple hail events this year. Rather strong hail, not like the typical little hail that you sometimes get, but really strong hail events. And so we lost some of the crop already right during flowering. Just really you could see the flowering bunches lying on the ground, but it mostly hit the west of the Kamptal, which is bad for us because we have a couple of vineyards there, which is like the area where also our Erste Lage Kittmannsberg is situated, so relatively high elevated area. Really, yeah, I would say one of the filet parts of the Kamptal. And yeah, so then second time the hail hit was, if I remember correctly, 26th of July, 2 days after my birthday, and 28th of July. And that was a strong hail, very heavy hail. Again, hit the west very hard, but kind of made its way through the north of Langenlois, so where we have Schenkenbüchel, Erste Lage, where we have Steinhaus, and went all the way back to Zöbing. It didn't really hit the Heiligenstein, just partially. But yeah, so this is unfortunately mainly the Langenlois area that was hit, which costed us around 20, maybe 25% of our harvest this year. And we talked about this earlier, also had an interesting effect in plant protection. So since 2019, I'm now experimenting with copper-free, only plant-based plant protection, or not, well, and sulfur. And in 2020, which was already a wet year, this experiment, which was at the time only 2 vineyards, went really nice, problem-free, which was much to my surprise, but also a very positive surprise. So I was very confident to extend this experiment to more varieties, more vineyards. So it was about 7 hectares of vines in 2021 that I protected this way, and worked well for the most part, except for that wherever the hail hit, for some reason, I had troubles, like really with contamination of Peronospora, and to this day, I'm not quite sure what happened. We just discussed it earlier now, and that's why I'm mentioning this, because the interesting case was also that we had 2 terraces right next to each other, and just sprayed exactly the same way. Whereas in the top terrace, I had really, unfortunately, high contamination. Whereas at the lower terrace, nothing happened. So since this is still, an experiment for me, and like trying to find my way of how I could best make it work, it's okay that it happened, but also like now it starts the work of reflecting on what exactly happened, because it seems to me quite odd, still unclear. But yeah, so this experiment is going on, and we'll proceed also this vintage. So let's see what the summer brings. But I'm positive that this keeps evolving into something very good. And well, yeah, brings us to the harvest. So summer ended, we had a lot of rain too, which didn't make the plant protection easier. So we had, I think, 250 liters of rain, which is like half of the year's rainfall in just July and August. And since we had late bud break and late flowering, we were already foreseeing a late harvest, which we then started in the end of September. At this time, the rainfalls were over, thank God. No repeating of the 2020 vintage, where we had really the challenge of like a stop and go harvest with some rain during the harvest. This harvest 2021 was beautiful. We like the grapes were super healthy, except for this one trialing vineyard where whatever seemed to happen. But nonetheless, overall, extremely beautiful grapes. Very good acidity levels, very high acidity levels at the point when we started harvest, and the weather was sunny, and most of the time I think we had 2 days of rainfall. And so for me, my how I perceived it was that the physiological ripeness, just judging from the taste, and I do this with also someone who has a lot of experience with it, which is my father, and we usually do that together, also with my brother. But judging from the taste, we thought for us, we made the decision for us that the physiological ripeness is not keeping up to the sugar ripeness. For some reason, I heard also differently from many others, but that was how we perceived it. So nonetheless, we started end of September. We harvested relatively quickly in the beginning because the sugar levels were rising quite fast. The weather was sunny, as I mentioned, and it wasn't too cold, so it was mild, which pushed the sugar concentration up. We reached very high must weights till the end of the harvest, which lasted until early November. And surprisingly enough, the acidity kept a very high level. So brings us to wines that are not so comparing it to 2020, that are, I think that's also what I assumed. We would have lower must weights in the end, just from how the vintage went. But now with the higher must weights, we will not be as light as 2020. I think though that's also the reason why there is right now, as I see a lot of depth. Again, a good concentration. Similar to last year, also with the aromatic ripeness, which is this long ripening period that we enjoyed again this year. Very good aromatic ripeness, so very aromatic musts. Especially the Grüner Veltliners are this year like very fragrant. A lot of yellow fruit, apple-y, so just overall beautiful to me. And we had troubles a little bit this year with fermentation, which is also odd. So that's why I say like a couple of odd things happened in 2021. So fermentation, that I heard from most of my colleagues, they had troubles with fermentation, meaning that the musts would just be very, very slow with fermentation, or sometimes, get stuck. Sometimes they catch a cold because we went into November with the harvest. So when it gets cold outside and it gets cold in the cellar, and the must sinks in temperature, they catch a cold, and then sometimes fermentation will just end. But yeah, so due to this slow fermentation, which is still going on right now in some tanks and barrels, we also have more malolactic fermentation this year. So that tends to happen with the slow fermentations, which is nothing unusual for us, since we if it happens, it happens. And I would say, especially this year, it's good that it happened. We get a spontaneous mellow, which will never really result in buttery, milky, bready flavors or aromatics, but gives you a slightly different fruit character. That's especially this year, a bit more roundness and creaminess, definitely. But that's as I mentioned, with those really high with the really high acidity that we had this year, it's actually something I'm happy about. And so far, it looks like what it promises, what it promised. It's going to be a really, really great and potentially very age-worthy vintage. So I guess we had we were lucky with 2021.
Perfect. Thank you very much.